Hello besties and welcome to another Genshin theory! Almost a year ago, I began my expansive list of Genshin theories with a 3-part series on Khaenri'ah. Since then, a lot of new information has come out and so many of my thoughts have changed, so I think it's about time for me to revisit Khaenri'ah and take a second look at what happened there 500 years ago. Just like the original Khaenri'ah theory, this revamped version will also be a multi-part series with the same goals as the first. The goals of this theory are to determine what events took place in Khaenri'ah, identify key members of the conflict, and predict future events related to Khaenri'ah. This reworked theory will have some of the same evidence presented in the original but looked at under a different lens. I'll also be going over some things I've talked about in various other videos and connecting them with each other, so don't be surprised if you hear me say something I've said before. I just need to synthesize all of my theories here in relation to Khaenri'ah. With all that said, let's begin where we started last time. Before we get into the updated version of today's theory, I need to go over the important points of the original that still hold up today. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence that the Cataclysm was something that the Archons were forced to participate in by Celestia. In their second story quest, Zhongli and A both talk about the Cataclysm like it's something that happened to them rather than something they wanted.
Rift hounds attacking the sacred Sakura. It brings back bad memories of that terrible disaster. 500 years ago, a great catastrophe befell Inazuma. Everything was engulfed in a pitch-black fog, and monsters ravaged the land. Countless lives were lost. And this homeland that the people had worked so hard to build barely escaped being obliterated entirely. That's an episode of history that I am loath to recall. The events of 500 years ago not only robbed me of my friend, Kitsune Saigu, they also took Makoto away from me. She went to Khaenri'ah alone, without telling me. Why did she go to Khaenri'ah first, and not I?
You mean another past grievance? Like the incident with Ejdah? Too painful to talk about?
It was signed before it all began. I have always honored the contract, and kept my silence.
How can you be like that?
You two are friends to me. I can assure it brings me no pleasure to disappoint you.
I still think what I said about Venti and Zhongli makes sense today, but I wrote my initial Khaenri'ah theory before we met A, before we knew Kusanali's name, and before we even heard about the Primordial One. Those three, along with the rest of the Archons, are incredibly important pieces to this puzzle that I was missing last time. With them here now, I feel more confident putting it all together. A's story is unique. She wasn't actually there for most of the Cataclysm. Her sister Makoto went to Khaenri'ah with the rest of the Archons without telling her. A stayed back in Inazuma to protect her country from the incoming Khaenri'ah attack on the home front. Towards the end of the battle, A left Inazuma and went to Khaenri'ah to find her sister, but when she arrived, she found Makoto dead. Since then, A has seemingly renounced Celestia, willingly giving up her Gnosis way before the Tsaritsa wanted to take everyone else's. In the original theory, I said that Celestia must have forced the Archons to participate in the destruction of Khaenri'ah, and I think this is just more evidence of that. Because why else would A get rid of her connection to Celestia? It's not out of regret for something that she voluntarily decided to do. If wiping out Khaenri'ah was something she wanted, then why would she inexplicably give up her Gnosis afterwards? It's not just regret or guilt, it's anger. A was probably upset that her sister and subsequently she had to do things that they didn't want to do because Celestia said so. When I wrote my Khaenri'ah theory before we met A, I assumed she would be a loyalist to Celestia, but now that we know her and her story, she's arguably one of the more defiant Archons. She got rid of her Gnosis before anyone else did because she was so disgusted with her connection to Celestia. But much more defiant than A is the Tsaritsa. In my original theory, I really neglected the Tsaritsa. Looking back on it, I think that was a really stupid thing to do considering how important she is to the overall plot of Genshin. She functions as a secondary antagonist with the Abyss Order as the primary antagonist, but I don't think she's evil. If anything, I think her heart is in the right place, but she's just going about things in the wrong way. Lately, I've been theorizing that the Tsaritsa wants to take every Archon's Gnosis because she wants to save them from Celestia. An Archon's Gnosis is their connection to Celestia. Venti and Zhongli only had their Gnosis because Celestia gave them to them after the Archon War. We'll get to the other Archons later. Point is, if they have their Gnosis, Celestia can manipulate them. Sick of being controlled, A willingly got rid of hers after the Cataclysm. But to me, it seems like the others are too scared of Celestia to do that without some form of protection. That's probably why Zhongli made an agreement with the Tsaritsa in exchange for his Gnosis. I think that she promised to protect his country in the event of a disaster. That would explain why the Fatui are still all over Liyue even though the Archon quest is long over. What that disaster entails is beyond me, though. Celestia has a pattern of attacking people that defy them, so maybe it would be something like what happened in Khaenri'ah or Salvin Dagnir, but we have no way of knowing for sure unless it actually happens. I know people aren't going to agree with me when I say the Tsaritsa is actually trying to do something good for Teyvat. Dissenters point to how Signora took Venti's gnosis as evidence that she's an antagonist. But Signora has personal issues with Venti. I doubt the Tsaritsa wanted it to be so confrontational, but when Signora came across someone who had wronged her, she couldn't help but get revenge. At the end of the day, it's for his own good, and I think deep down Venti knows that. They really didn't fight to get their gnosis back. They could have easily gone after Signora after the incident, but they know it's for the greater good that they don't have it anymore. We only have a few accounts of the Tsaritsa's personality right now, but from what we know, it seems like she's actually a very caring person. In a leaked closed beta test voice line, Venti says that she was the warmest of the Archons, and Child says that she's a gentle soul who dreams of peace. She also has a pattern of taking care of societal outcasts. All of the Harbingers so far seem to stand out from society in some way. Signora was exiled from Mondstadt, Dottore was ostracized in the Sumeru Academia, Scaramouche wasn't good enough for A, and Child disappeared into the abyss when he was 14. These are people who didn't fit in anywhere, but the Tsaritsa saw something in them and put her trust in them. But the Tsaritsa obviously is not perfect. She created the Fatui, a dangerous international crime organization. I know she founded the Fatui for a good reason, but there have been irreversible negative consequences from their existence alone. Take what happened with the Watatsumi army, for example. They got a shipment of delusions from the Fatui, but it ended up seriously and sometimes fatally harming people. But if I remember correctly, that was just Scaramouche's plan, and now that he's cut off contact with the Fatui after completing his own personal mission, I don't know if we can fully pin that on the Tsaritsa. But I have a hard time believing that she didn't know what was going on. She probably just thought it was for the greater good or that the delusions wouldn't backfire so intensely. After all, there are plenty of people who use delusions with no problem at all, so maybe she was just hoping that they would be immune to whatever weird side effects come with them. But regardless, I really do think that the Tsaritsa is trying to help Teyvat. She wants to distance her fellow Archons from Celestia, which would subsequently take away Celestia's control of Teyvat as a whole. Lesser Lord Kusanali is the current Dendro Archon, but before her was the God of the Woods. During the Cataclysm, the God of the Woods died. The Genshin wiki says that they died when, quote, disaster descended upon Khaenri'ah, which implies that the fatal blow came from Celestia, not Khaenri'ah aggressors. After their death, Celestia was in need of a replacement Dendro Archon. It's said that Kusanali was born right when the God of the Woods died and immediately became the new Dendro Archon. The explanation for that is really long, so bear with me here, I promise it'll make sense at the end. Throughout my almost year-long career of writing Genshin theories, one thing has consistently evaded me: visions. Despite being one of the most important pieces of Genshin's story and gameplay, I could never seem to figure out exactly what's going on with them. A common misconception about visions is that they're given out by the Archons, but in one of A's voice lines, she says that she has no control over who gets electrovisions. So it's safe to assume that the rest of the Archons don't have a say in who receives their respective visions too. However, visions clearly come from the gods, so if not the Archons, then that really only leaves Celestia. After all, they're the only gods influential enough to have that power. One of the most widely accepted theories about visions is that they're spying equipment from Celestia. It certainly makes a lot of sense on the surface. In the original text, visions are called Eyes of God, which would obviously make you think that the gods give them to people and see through the visions. But why would Celestia need to closely monitor specific people? If the celestial gods are truly the omnipotent gods they've been presented to us as, then why would they need an external resource to do something as simple as spying? It just doesn't make sense. People who have visions are referred to by the gods as Allergenes. The word Genshin literally translates to Allergene, in case you were wondering what the title of the game actually meant. In Gnosticism, the sect of Christianity that a lot of Genshin is based on, Allergenes are demigods, to put it simply. In Genshin, Allergenes aren't born gods, but have the potential to become them instead. We've been over this plenty of times before. Ascending to Celestia is a bad thing. You don't want to ascend to Celestia because Celestia is clearly established as Genshin's overarching antagonist. Allergenes can become gods when they ascend to Celestia, but if ascending to Celestia is bad, then how come some Allergenes are rewarded when it happens while others aren't? Allergenes aren't guaranteed godhood when they arrive in Celestia. It's just something that can happen, not something that always happens. Some Allergenes ascend to Celestia, and that's it. They're in the afterlife with no special treatment. As for other Allergenes, we aren't entirely sure what that entails. But I think we know of someone who may have all the answers. Kusanali, the current Dendro Archon, was born 500 years ago, immediately following the fall of Khaenri'ah. During the Cataclysm, the previous Dendro Archon, the God of the Woods, died. Kusanali took the position of Dendro Archon as soon as they died, which doesn't make a lot of sense considering she was also born at the same time they died. I doubt Celestia decided that they wanted a baby to be their replacement Archon, so there has to be some other explanation. Since we heard about Kusanali, I've been theorizing that she was friends with the God of the Woods before their passing and took over their role once they were gone, but now I think I've come up with a different story. Perhaps Kusanali was actually dead long before the Cataclysm ever happened, and the life she's currently living is actually her second. Kusanali's birth may not have been a traditional birth in feasible terms. After the old Dendro Archon died, Celestia needed to quickly replace them, especially considering the events that had just taken place in Khaenri'ah. The people of Sumeru would need someone kind and intelligent to guide them through such a difficult time. So rather than finding someone already living in Teyvat, Celestia turned to Dendro users they already knew and had on retainer. I think that Allogenes who become gods don't do it as soon as they get to Celestia, but they wait there until Celestia decides if they need them to become a god or not. Since Kusanali would fit the criteria necessary, Celestia could have chosen her to descend to Teyvat once again and live another life as the new Dendro Archon and the God of Wisdom. Before sending her to Teyvat, Celestia would likely have to wipe Kusanali's memory of her past life and trade her Dendro vision for a Gnosis. I know that sounds crazy, but I actually don't think it's that unrealistic. It's not unheard of for the Archons to have really weird origin stories. A was created as a puppet identical to her sister. This isn't confirmed, but it's implied that Lyra's chasm was created when a meteor crashed into the Earth, and that meteor later became Morax. Kusanali easily could have just as strange a birth as the others. As for wiping her memory, I think that actually adds up too. Do you ever notice how nobody in Teyvat talks about Khaenri'ah and the Cataclysm, even though it only happened 500 years ago and it was a major worldwide event? There are two possible explanations for that. One, Celestia kills everyone who speaks about the horrific acts they committed there, or two, Celestia erased every normal person's memory of the tragedy. It could be one or the other, or a mixture of the two. Either way, I think it's possible that Celestia could erase someone's memory. Plus, with Kusanali staying in Celestia for so long after her death in her first life, maybe she experienced erosion in the afterlife that caused her to lose her memories without Celestia's interference. When Celestia saw that she was a blank slate for them to mold their new Dendro Archon, they chose her. If this is the case, then that would mean all of the Archons except Venti and Zhongli went through the same thing. That's such a manipulative and controlling thing to do. Since Kusanali was born after Khaenri'ah had already fallen, I doubt she'll have much to say about the Cataclysm, but I think we may learn more about how Celestia is controlling from her. We know almost nothing about Murata and the Hydro Archon. We don't even have a confirmed name for the Hydro Archon, but she is referred to as Folklore in leaked closed beta test lines from Venti. But I think they'd be on the Tsaritsa's side when it comes to opposing Celestia. Murata is the god of war, so who better to have on your side when fighting Celestia? The people of Natlan are actually called Muradans, which I think is kinda cute. They clearly admire her a lot to call themselves that, so I assume she's one of the nicer Archons. The Hydro Archon seems to be way colder than Murata, but she is the god of justice. I'm sure she'll want to bring Celestia to justice after what they did not only to her and the rest of the Archons, but to the innocent people of Khaenri'ah. The point of this series isn't just to add new information, but also to revisit and potentially debunk my old thoughts. In my original theory, I had a limited understanding of Genshin's overall lore and Easter eggs. Now, after a considerable amount of time playing the game, I've obviously had time to learn a lot more. Venti has a complicated relationship with Khaenri'ah and the Abyss Order, which we know is the last remaining Khaenri'an organization. To me, it seems like Venti has a special connection to the Abyss Order that the other Archons just don't have. But it's not a good connection. It seems like the few surviving Khaenri'ans feel a great amount of resentment towards Venti specifically. Khaenri'ah was sent to Mondstadt by his birth father to infiltrate the country as a spy. In the Windbloom event story, Khaenri'ah says he wants to learn how to write love poetry from Venti. It seemed a little weird at first, but there's nothing inherently wrong with that. After all, Khaenri'ah is very flirtatious, so it's not 100% out of character for him. But the poetry Khaenri'ah wrote is not a love poem at all. If anything, it's the opposite. He wrote "I Triumph Over You" in Hilichurlian. Venti was the only one who was supposed to read this poem because it was specifically written for his criticism as a teacher. Khaenri'ah clearly has something against Venti because he wrote that, but that could be anything. We know they both frequent angel share, so maybe something minor happened between them there. But Khaenri'ah isn't the only Khaenri'an who has an issue with Venti. In We Will Be Reunited, Dainsley says it's unwise to trust the gods. He doesn't specify whether or not he meant the Archons by that, which led to a huge misunderstanding by a lot of the Genshin community where we all thought that the Archons wanted to kill everyone in Khaenri'ah. I do think he was referring to the Archons when he said not to trust the gods, though, but I really don't think he knows what he's talking about except for with Venti. He told us this in Mondstadt. Afterwards, we had to go to the Favonius Cathedral, but Dainsley refused to go near it in protest. In the domain from We Will Be Reunited, there was a corrupted Mondstadt statue of the Seven. We know that the Abyss Order stole it for sure, but why did they choose to take one from Mondstadt? The domain was in Lyra, so it would be way easier to just take one from there, but they went out of their way to deface a statue of Venti. That seems so personal to me. Speaking of Venti statues, there's some pretty weird stuff going on with the one that's actually inside the city. One time when I was live streaming, I discovered that if you draw a straight line from Decarabian's tower to Spiral Abyss, two locations that we know are related to Khaenri'ah, it perfectly intersects the statue of Barbados outside of the Favonius Cathedral. I used this in the theory about the underground tunnels built by Khaenri'ahns that go all across Teyvat. I still think that theory makes sense, but why would Khaenri'ahns build a tunnel that's directly beneath that statue? I didn't know this when I wrote that theory, but at the base of the statue it says the gateway to Celestia. That has to be why Khaenri'ahns wanted easy access to it. It's the gateway to the place where their oppressors live. I think that at some point in the future we'll see a portal open up on or above the statue that takes us to Celestia. Maybe that's why Khaenri'ahns feel such disdain towards Venti specifically. His statue is the key to reaching Celestia. I don't have a perfect answer for why that is. You could explain it a million ways that all make sense in their own rights. You could say that Venti is a loyalist to Celestia and that's why they get access to the gateway, or you could say that Venti is the least loyal to Celestia, so they placed a portal in his country as a fear tactic. Next week we'll be focusing on Khaenri'ah's involvement in the Cataclysm. I'm really excited to revisit this old series and do it again. I'm always thinking about Khaenri'ah and theories I can come up with about it, so it's really fun to do another series dedicated to just that. Good luck to everyone pulling in 2.6, I'm gonna go for Ayaka. I have a guaranteed limited, but my pity's only at 4 right now, so I really need her to come home early. I hope everyone's pre-farming goes well, because mine isn't, because I keep getting really bad artifacts. But that new festival looks super cute. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye, besties!